Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast. This is DJ and I'll be your host for this week. I'm actually in Delhi. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see I'm wearing some warm clothes. It's quite chilly here, but I'm very excited. I've got with me the tweeter of Threads, a cricket historian, a writer, the chief editor of Cricket News, and not Pranab Mukherjee's son, Abhishek Mukherjee. Welcome to the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor.
Abhishek, tell me about the Pranab Mukherjee reference first, because I know it's in your Twitter profile, Abhishek42. Where does this whole originate? Where does this come from?
Okay. I have often been, Mr. Mukherjee, when he was there, he was president, and he did something, and people congratulated me. They actually tagged me, and if he did something they didn't like, they tagged me again, and then the things got really a bit out of hand when he passed away last year. So I got a lot of condolence messages on Twitter.
But is his son actually Abhishek Mukherjee? Or...
No, his son is called Abhijit Mukherjee. Actually, if you look on the internet, you'll find several articles that mentions Abhishek Mukherjee. I don't know why they do this, but it was slightly, I got to know from Twitter that he had passed away, and I got messages, so sorry for your loss and things like that. Everyone I know was alive, so it went, and the other person, I also get confused for, as Abhishek Banerjee, who is a TMC politician, and so now Abhijit Mukherjee joined TMC, and he met Abhishek Banerjee, and things really got out of hand after that with my taggings. So
okay, now I understand the reference in your Twitter bio. But your day job, Abhishek, is in cricket, right? You're a writer, you edit cricket news, you're a historian, and we are here to talk about cricket. And I mean, what a week it's been. We thought it'd be a quiet week in cricket. There wasn't any live cricket ongoing. Not much was happening. We thought we'd talk about the South Africa tour upcoming, which we will do in the second half of the show. But Abhishek, let's get into the Kohli Dada saga. You wrote an article recently for the Quint, which I'll put a link in the show notes, which is a fantastic article, which goes on to sort of explain how the BCCI has never really explained its decision and how Kohli and fans deserve better than what's going on in the BCCI. But for our listeners who've been somehow living under a rock and don't know what's happening, can you just encapsulate what has happened in this last week with Kohli's press conference, Ganguly's clarifications, and how have we reached this situation?
First of all, I read a Sharda piece today, and it feels very odd speaking something after Sharda has written something. I mean, but still, see, Kohli was sacked as ODI captain. He is not the first cricketer or first athlete, first captain to be sacked. My first question is, why are we making a big deal out of this? Why did we let this happen? Why did BCCI let this happen? A captain has been sacked, chapter closed. It has happened many times before. In India, outside India, in cricket, outside cricket. This happens. Captains are sacked. It's a select. Secondly, why did the BCCI president get involved? This is a decision taken by selectors and should have been restricted to the captain, the person involved, and the selectors. Why does anyone else need to get involved at all? Why should they give their versions? Why let this happen? It makes no sense. It's a selector's decision. Why? It doesn't make sense to me at all.
Agreed. So I think the first question in fans' minds is, was the sacking justified? You're looking at a guy who's been so highly successful. Maybe that's what started it all off. Why was the sacking necessary?
if you look at win-loss ratios, put a 51-day cutoff, the only three captains with a better win-loss ratio are Clive Lloyd, Ricky Ponting, and Hansi Cronje. And we shall agree that they led all-time great teams. Three teams that will go down as all-time best in the history of one-day cricket. We are sacking the fourth best captain. But okay, the selectors came up with a cricketing reason that they want the same captain for one day and T20 internationals. It's okay. And Kohli, even if he was captain going to lead the ODI side, it would not have been for a long time. Some people will bring up the point of ICC tournaments. I don't buy that, because the last one ODI ICC tournament India played was 2.5 years ago. If ICC tournaments was an issue, then you could have sacked him 2.5 years ago. Why now?
Plus, only Dhoni and Kapil Dev have ever won an ICC tournament, so to speak, a world tournament, so to speak, other than the championship in 1985.
But that's okay. I mean, we must understand this. This is the greatest Indian team of all time. So the bar is way higher. What you could have been a cricketer not as great and still retained your spot maybe 20 years ago. But now the bar is so high, the competition is so intense that the standards have to be really high. If the selectors are looking for that even the slightest lapse from anything below the highest level is unacceptable, okay, that's a cricketing reason. But again, why should the BCCI president get involved? That's a decision to be taken by selectors and the selectors, and to be informed to the captain. And mind you, when all versions agree that Kohli said that he was informed 1.5 hours ago or something like that, and Kohli never said he had a problem with that. Kohli accepted it. So the matter should have ended there. The selectors informed him, Kohli accepted it, end of story. The questions asked to Kohli at the press conference, the contradiction between the two versions, between Ganguly and Kohli, were unnecessary. They had nothing to do with cricket. They had nothing to do with the sacking at all. They had to do with something that happened in September.
And so what happened in September? Why are there contradictions between a ex-player captain who's now the president of the BCCI, who's been through this with Chappell?
See,
who's been sacked? He knows what it feels like.
An out-and-out Kohli fan will tell you that Kohli is correct and Ganguly is wrong. Kohli is telling the truth and Ganguly is lying. And an out-and-out Ganguly fan will tell you that Ganguly is the honest person and Kohli is lying. The point is, we know that at least one of them is lying. There's no doubt about this. Both versions cannot be true. We know this. And we have no proof either way.
Correct. And both versions, both sides will accuse the other side of being arrogant. Yes. That word gets thrown around a lot, that Kohli is arrogant and Dada is arrogant. So is it a clash of two alphas in a completely unnecessary scenario?
Had this event happened in September, this could have been informed by BCCI to the media in September, to the world. The world would have known this by September. At that point, they could have said, okay, we don't want to do this just before a big tournament. Now they will tell we don't want to do this before a South Africa tour, but they have done the damage before the South Africa tour. That cannot be undone. You can't, they just did a couple of things and then they want to stop now. Okay, I mean, at least now we can focus on the cricket. Though a lot of us don't seem to, but yeah, at least.
Yeah, it's that little lull between two series where there's no cricket ongoing, right? That's when all the drama breaks. The Tim Paine resignation takes place. This drama happens.
Which is why you have to feel. I mean, Priyank Panchal has been doing such great, has been playing such great cricket over the years. He finally gets rewarded. That goes unnoticed. Ruturaj Gaikwad has a phenomenal season in Vijay Hazare. That goes unnoticed. season to die for, what Ruturaj played this year, that goes unnoticed completely. The Women's World Cup itinerary has been announced. That goes unnoticed. But these days, BCCI don't seem to care enough, but that's okay. It is what it is.
Yeah, because
And,
we're just stuck in a war of words between two factions at the moment. You've got
and of course, I mean, I think the Ashes gets more hype than it deserves. But I'm at least following the Ashes feels more peaceful than this.
yeah. I mean, let's talk about the Ashes very briefly because I live in London and it seems like they only build up to the Ashes every few years. And I mean, when they go down under it to Australia, I mean, I think they've won once in the past decade, but it seems to be the same story served up every time. Lots of runs, bowlers uh, ground into the dust. Australia winning 4-0, 5-0. Why are England so bad in Australia? What is up with them? I mean, it's more competitive when Australia comes to England. We had 2-2 last
It's
time.
not about being bad in Australia. They're bad at home.
That's true as well.
They
Yes.
lost to New Zealand and India, not just one team, both teams.
True. True.
And they
They're
were
trailing
humiliated
India.
in India. So they're
Yeah.
not just losing in Australia, they're losing everywhere. They beat Sri Lanka, I have to give it to them. But they're generally losing to more strong teams.
Yeah. True. True. So, but England have been doing this for years and years, but yet they keep coming back and saying Ashes is the greatest series ever, and we must prepare for the Ashes. All of this is planning for the Ashes.
If you look at the Ashes promos, they are full of clips and photographs from Ashes history, and that is what I mean. They feature more historical clips and photographs than recent pieces. So essentially, it thrives on history. Ashes, I would have to accept it. You cannot help but accept that Ashes markets and sells history better than any other cricketing contest. There's no doubt about it.
True.
And
I think
they
England
package
generally
it.
does that as well. I mean, England has a guided tour and a gift shop for almost every sporting stadium.
Yes.
So, it's marketing and packaging. Maybe one for the BCCI to learn from.
Yeah. England. We have to learn how to package and sell history. How to make history cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about history, you've written in your piece about how this is not new for the BCCI, how these random decisions and captain. There was one point in your piece where I think you said they wanted to appoint somebody captain, but he'd already caught a trail. So they
Yeah.
decided to appoint somebody else captain.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a few of these instances in the
Okay.
past?
So this was 1958-59. This was the most bizarre series ever. One of the most bizarre series India played. The first Test match, Ghulam Ahmed was captain, and Ghulam instantly told them that the Bombay crowd doesn't like me. I won't lead. So they got Umrigar to lead. India drew the match, and then they did not retain Umrigar. They appointed Ghulam Ahmed as captain for the next 2 Test matches, and India lost. So what they did was Ghulam Ahmed resigned immediately, and after he resigned, what happened was they offered it to Umrigar. I think they first convinced Ghulam again. And Ghulam reluctantly agreed and then refused. And then they convinced Umrigar. And then Umrigar even delivered the speech, captain's speech, a day before on the eve of the Test match. And then once he returned to the hotel, he resigned. The selectors tried all night to convince him. At about 3 in the morning, Subhash Gupta was sharing a room. The next room. He heard from the next room. He heard Umrigar crying. So in the morning, India were without a captain. In the morning of a Test match, 15 minutes ago, the West Indian captain Jerry Alexander asks Gupta, "Who is going to lead you? Who is going to toss?" They said, "We don't know. It's all communal. We don't need a captain." And then while this was happening, the selectors were convincing Vinu Mankad. They had cornered Mankad in a toilet behind the dressing room and got him to lead and convinced him to lead. And Mankad contracted an allergy during the Test match. So Ramchand led. And after the Test match, they were impressed with Ramchand. So they decided, okay, Ramchand will lead India. So by the time they could contact Ramchand, Ramchand had left for the station. And they could not contact him. So they basically found another captain instead of trying to contact him. And this was Adhikari. Adhikari had not played Test cricket for 2 years. He was a serviceman. He was posted in an army camp in Dharamshala. He refused. He thought he had been unfairly dropped, so he refused. And now they contacted his wife. Even his wife couldn't convince him, so they contacted his senior in the army. And then his senior actually asked Adhikari to lead, and he basically followed orders to lead. And the moment that test was over, and India drew that test match, for the next series, they appointed Tour of England. They appointed Datta Gaikwad as captain, who was not certain of a spot in the side. And then Pankaj Roy led in the second test when Gaikwad missed. And once the Indian team returned, they recalled Ramchand not only to the side but to lead. It was a bizarre scenario. I mean, this scenario has almost no parallel in the history of Test cricket. So this was what BCCI used to be like.
But it again, we keep coming back to this captaincy. It seems to be a captaincy, vice captaincy theme. Now with Rohit Sharma now ruled out of the upcoming test against South Africa, the BCCI have now appointed KL Rahul as the vice captain of the team. Now, 2 series ago, KL Rahul was not even our first choice opener.
But I suppose they wanted someone younger. And someone more or less certain to play all 3 test matches. And they have probably made up their mind not to give it to a bowler. So I think he's
being Ashwin, not giving it to Ashwin or Bumrah Rishabh Pant is assured of playing the 3 test matches, I would expect. So interesting decision to give it to KL Rahul. But I mean, it's been a week of.
But anyway, it is a stopgap arrangement. But the thing is, they did not go back to Rahane. I think that is the takeaway.
Yeah, correct. They did not go back to Rahane. What is your thought around? Because initially when all of this started and unfolded, Rohit had taken over from Virat. So it was Virat versus Rohit. Those were the camps. Where is Rohit Sharma in all of this at the moment? Of course, there was the accusation that Kohli doesn't want to play under Rohit. That's why he's skipping the ODI leg, which is not even true anymore.
It's not even true. This Virat versus Rohit, the entire thing has no evidence. This is all speculation.
Sources,
inside sources. I can't use quotation marks while speaking, right? It's only in writing.
We can show them on video. But yeah, it's been a bizarre week. I mean, we can talk for hours about what has gone on with this saga. Who is right? Who said what? Well, I mean, factually, Kohli is going to play the ODIs. Rohit is ruled out because of injury. He may play the ODIs. Who would be the ODI captain if Virat isn't going to lead? If Rohit is ruled out for the ODIs, do we have an ODI vice captain?
I think they have sort of established that it is going to be Rahul.
Okay, so Rahul in the ODI.
I think it's the obvious thing, but we must remember that India's last ODI captain was Shikhar Dhawan.
And he's not even going to be in the squad.
He will. Yeah. There's no reason for him to not play the ODIs.
True. He was the T20 captain in Sri Lanka as well.
Yeah.
So
So essentially, India's last 2 ODI captains were Kohli and Dhawan. And India's next ODI captain may be Rahul. And the ODI captain after that may be Rohit. So India may have 4 ODI captains in 4.
Are we slowly becoming Pakistan, where every player has at one point captained the team, which is
you don't have to go back to Pakistan. Sri Lanka in the second half of the 2010s ran through about 10-12 captains, I think.
Right, possibly. I only remember Mahela and Jayawardene, and they got along, which was good for Sri Lankan cricket. And
after 2015, I think virtually the entire side led at some point.
Wow. Okay. Well, hopefully we don't go down the Sri Lankan route, but I think we've talked a lot about captaincy. I think there's a lot that's been said. As you say, I mean, once Sharda Ugra has written about it, there's little anybody else can say about the matter. I think you've written about it. There's been plenty of good writing. I think Sid Monga has just written about how Kohli is taken on the BCCI, how it's his bravest gambit, and there's lots. We'll put links to all of this, but it's been a tough week, I think, for an Indian cricket fan. It's not a great look from the outside. Whereas
Yeah,
what we should be looking forward to is cricket.
I mean, batting, writing, speaking after Sharda writes is essentially batting at number 4 for Australia in the Bradman era. I mean, he'll always be an anticlimax.
Indeed. So we will take a short break and we will come back to actually talk about cricket. We're done with the dramatic part of this episode. So we're going to now sweep that aside. We're going to go back and we talk nostalgia because we're going to talk all about the previous tours of India, going to South Africa, our favorite memories, our disappointments. So don't go anywhere and we will see you straight after this break. Welcome back from that break, and you're still listening to the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast, and I'm in conversation with Abhishek Mukherjee. Abhishek, my first memory of cricket in South Africa, India going to South Africa, is that of very hazy sort of 1992 pictures on Doordarshan, orange stumps, Kapil Dev pulling off a run out at the bowler's end, Sachin Tendulkar, I think, becoming the first man ever to be given out by the third umpire. But what I want to really do in this section is to talk about the positive memories and the negative memories. I've written down over here a few positives and a few negatives. So maybe we can see which ones we have in common. Maybe you can come up with some new ones. So I'll let you take the floor on this
one. Okay. First tour, I think there's some personal memories. See, first tour happened in the end of 1992. I don't have the exact dates. I can't speak the exact dates from memory. But on 6th December 1992, there was an attack. We know the Babri Masjid incident. So the entire nation went into a curfew. Not the entire nation, but major cities. So this was the Doordarshan era. So you know what the coverage was like, what the television was like. And this was our highest point of the day. That was what the first Indian tour of South Africa was like to us, to many of us, to people who were stuck in their homes. We were allowed to go out for 1 hour to buy things, to buy essentials. 2 weeks of curfew in some places. So this was the high point of our day. Watching news, what happened in the country, and following. They did not show the test matches live, but they showed the ODIs live. And that was the high point. So yes, the first tour, memories of the Ayodhya incident are inseparable from the memories of the first tour. And I'll tell you something. And this was a phase when India were emerging into an open market, open economy, and South Africa were emerging into a emerging towards a normal society. So essentially, both countries were opening up to the world. So essentially, the two countries, in a way, they are old countries, but they grew together in the 1990s, and their cricket also grew together. And this series is extremely important in terms of that. It was very fitting that India were the first team to tour South Africa for a test tour after the return, because India and South Africa share a very, very long shared past. There are many Indians in South Africa. They form a separate community, and it was very fitting that the tour started in Durban. The first test match was in Durban, where there is a huge Indian contingent. So that was something else. But before that, in South Africa returned to India in 1991, and I was there at the Eden Gardens for their first match. It was a packed house, and we had no clue who these South African players were. We had vaguely heard of Rice and Wessels, but none of the others, because coverage of the newspapers covered some cricket from England, Australia, West Indies, perhaps. But South Africa, we had no chance. We had just some pen sketches of these cricketers. Very vaguely, we had heard of their names. We had heard of Barry Richardson, Graham Pollock, but not about this team that came in, which is why the first time we saw Alan Donald, we were shell shocked, left in the stadium. I mean, it was a memory to cherish.
Okay, so let's move on to the next tour, which is 1996, 1997. Now, this is I've got much clearer memories of this because I was a bit older. We'd just seen Sachin Tendulkar take over captaincy. He'd won a one-off test against Australia. He'd beaten the mighty South Africans and Australians in the Titan Cup, which was the ODI series. So, as Indian fans, you felt optimistic going to South Africa. You felt like something might happen. Obviously, I didn't know much at that point. I was 11 years old, so I didn't know how bad it could be.
In the 1990s, we never felt optimistic about a touring Indian side. Never did. No 1990s Indian fan felt optimistic.
No, but Sachin had just come and he was going to change everything. He was the golden boy of cricket.
Okay. 1990s, it was accepted that India will not win outside Asia and no touring country will ever win in India. And that was exactly what happened throughout the 1990s.
Correct. But I think my first memory of that tour, and that I think it's still a traumatizing memory. So this is one of the negative ones. Is Sachin's off-stump being sent cartwheeling by Alan Donald at Durban in that innings of 100 and second innings of 66, and it was just, I don't think I've ever gotten over that trauma of watching the South Africans demolish us in that first test match, Abhishek. I don't know. I mean, you've literally written a book about the series, so maybe over to you for some more positive stuff.
Before in the third test match, when I think there was a run out and VVS Lakshman was just outside the ropes. He was a reserve fielder. He was a substitute fielder. He was not a part of the 11 and he was applauding. And Daryl Cullinan was walking back. He was very angry and he threatened Lakshman, come to Durban, we'll show you. And just before the 5-day match, the test match in Durban, India had a tour match at Port Elizabeth and they deliberately prepared a super slow pitch, a slow pitch. So basically, they deprived India of any practice. They did not give any indication of what was coming for them in Durban. For our book, we interviewed G. Vishwanath, a very senior journalist who covered that tour. He was there and he was told by the South African journalists that India were bowled out for 166 and that was too much, they thought, because the cloud, their theory was the cloud was too high that day. Had the cloud been lower, the cloud was higher than usual. Had the cloud been lower, then 166 would not have been possible. That India were let off too easily that day. So that was
I'd actually forgotten about the series that you talked about, the 1996 series at home where Javagal Srinath took those wickets at Ahmedabad. And so the South Africans were hurting. They wanted to come back at the Indians. I'd actually totally blanked on that, but you're right. We'd won that 2-1. I think Azhar scored runs at Green Park in the third test match.
In the second test match in Kolkata, Azhar was hit on the elbow and then he retired hurt.
Oh, this is Klusna. Yeah.
And then he returned after 7 wickets fell. And he scored the fastest test 100 by an Indian. And what happened was he did not raise his bat. Until then, he had scored 100 every time he had batted in Eden Gardens. Every test match. But he did not raise his bat because he remembered that earlier that year, he had been booed at the Eden Gardens when India lost in the World Cup semi-final. So he did not acknowledge the applause. And in the second innings, he scored the only word I can use is an arrogant 50. He was hitting everything and timing everything. So I think he scored a runner ball 52 or something. But it was pure hitting. There was no calculated stroke play or something. It didn't feel like it. It was plain, simple hitting against bowling of the highest quality. But what we saw in the third test match was Azhar at his best. I mean, incredible stroke play. He was just placing everything to precision. that 163 is probably one of his best innings.
This is the one at Green Park in the home
Yes,
series
yes.
against South Africa, and then we go to South Africa over the winter, and
Their
and then
summer.
we have the 100 and their summer, and we have the 166. But then,
And then 58 for 5 in the second test.
and I will let you take the story over from there, because as our listeners know, you have literally written the book on this. So I will let you take the story over from there.
I don't know how it happened. I've been watching cricket for 35 years and I've never seen a partnership like that. What happens is typically a counter-attack happens at one end. This was happening at both ends. Against Donald Pollock, we know about Donald and Pollock, but Macmillan and Klusner also average below 20, below 30, under 30 in Test cricket. And Adams has a better average than almost any wrist spinner, including Shane Warne and Abdul Qadir against India. So this was the bowling attack. And against them, they just kept hitting at both ends for 40 overs. I do not remember any parallel to this that went on from both ends for 40 overs. It's usually at one end. And Tendulkar at least seemed, more, MCC would have approved of Tendulkar's shots. Let me put it this way. He seemed at least responding to the ball. Azhar was just hitting. And it was not hitting, he was not just hitting random bowlers. He was hitting a world-class attack. He was middling everything. He was placing everything. And at one point was the end of the innings. If you watch the video, you'll see for the first time I saw that expression on Alan Donald's face, that he didn't know what to do, where to bowl to Azhar. And this is a man who 7 years ago was criticized for his inability against fast bowling, criticized by his captain. So 7 years after that, he scored 300s in 4 test matches against South Africa. And what adds to it is this was in 1994, India toured New Zealand. That was the first time we got to see a test match from outside Asia live. Then summer of 1996, India went to England. That was the second. This was the third. And they panned out to the Cape Town, just outside the ground. It's a beautiful place. And then that was the backdrop. And they had met Nelson Mandela at the lunch interval. And that added to the aura of the partnership. So it was incredible. I've never seen batting like that.
And I remember as a 12-year-old at 58 for 5, actually just praying that India didn't get embarrassed again. I remember that partnership so well on my 14-inch color TV watching it.
Understand this, India at that point had lost 224, had scored 224 runs in the series and lost 25 wickets.
Indeed.
And then they add 222 runs in 40 overs.
Against that attack as well, on that pitch, with that fielding.
As I said, Tendulkar's shots were believable. Azhar's shots were unbelievable. Azhar outscored Tendulkar in that partnership.
And if I'm not wrong, it ended in a run-out. Did it end with a run-out?
Neither batter got out to a bowler. Azhar ended in a run-out. Azhar fell to a run-out.
And then
Andrew Hudson,
Adam Baker
probably the slowest fielder of the side, Andrew Hudson. And Adam Baker took a catch that was definitely not a bowler's wicket.
Which was basically what Ben Stokes did recently in the World Cup. Right? It was the exact same replica, that catch. But that was some partnership, and there is a book that Abhishek has written about it. So please go and get the book. Abhishek, what is the name of the book so our listeners can find it?
I co-authored with Arunava Sengupta, and this is Sachin and Azhar at Cape Town.
Sounds amazing. So guys, we'll put a link in the show notes. Please go and get that book. We still lost that test match. I think disappointingly, that was still not enough to get India even close. We lost quite convincingly in the, I think it was day 5. But then one of the positives for me came in the next test. The positive and negative both came in the next test, which was a Joe Ball. And I was always a Sachin fan as a kid. Growing up, you copied his style, you stood upright and tried to punch the ball back down the ground. But for the first time, I found out what a short arm pull was when Rahul Dravid scored 148.
And
It was his maiden
India
Test
flipped
100.
India flipped Dravid and Ganguly's batting positions,
And
and that
Dravid batted
and
three.
that yes, and that remained for the next over the next decade.
Indeed, indeed. And I became the biggest Rahul Dravid fan. The 148, his maiden 100, in his, I mean, the short arm pull, playing it to all those fast bowlers, just brilliant. But Joburg was a disappointment as well because we were robbed of a win. It was bad light. Daryl Cullinan again frustrated us. So for me, that was one of the um, sad memories of that. So we left South African shows 2-0 in 96, 97, where we could have quite easily left 2-1, which would have reflected a bit of a comeback and the team would have gotten used to the conditions, etc. by then. And any further reflections on that series?
That series sort of defined the Dravid at 3, Tendulkar at 4 thing. And basically what happened was Lakshman started his career against South Africa at Ahmedabad with a 50. And then in the Johannesburg test, I think Klusner, I think. Klusner broke his hand. And he was retired hurt. And then when he returned, he realized that Dravid, Tendulkar, Ganguly and Azhar were the middle four, so he had to open. So until then, Dravid had been opening in the occasional test match, but not Lakshman. Now that injury actually sealed Lakshman's fate for about 3 years until Azharuddin was out of the side. Until Azhar left the side, Lakshman was opening. Once Azhar went, Lakshman was back in the middle order.
Yeah, and Lakshman, I remember, I think scored runs against 96, 97 against Australia in 1998 at Eden Gardens, again, one of his favorite grounds, as an opener. The 167 at Sydney came as an opener as well. So, as you say, he only made his way back in.
But he didn't like to open. He never enjoyed opening.
Correct. And he went back and made his way back in as a middle order batsman and then went up to number 3 to displace Rahul Dravid, who'd gone to number 3 and then played that magical innings again at Kolkata in 2001. Right.
But between that, India lost the series at home, and that actually came as a real shock. We had got used to India never losing at home. First series India lost at home in 13 years.
Yeah.
So the last time that happened, Gavaskar was an active cricketer.
And this was just before the match fixing scandal broke.
Yes.
And,
the first test match India should have won. India took a first innings lead. And I think South Africa needed about 35, 40 runs with 4 wickets in hand. It came down there, and I remember Boucher coming out and sweeping. A couple of balls flying, but there was no short fine. I mean, the short fine leg was probably not put in the right position. I think, but these things happen. These things happen. It's always easier to see in hindsight. The ball on another day, the edge could have flown straight to the fielder. So the first test match should have been won. The second test match, India never stood a chance. And the problem was, what made it worse was these were turning pitches, and the South African fast bowlers made the difference. Nicky Boye bowled well, but South African fast bowlers did well, and South Africa won both test matches batting second. So that was really bad.
And this was the end of the Azhar era. Oh, it's the Sachin era for the second time.
Yes.
Sorry, because Sachin had taken over the captaincy again.
The second test match was Azhar's last test. India lost by an innings, but Azhar scored 100 in his last test match. His
99th test match, yeah. Indeed. And then, with the match fixing scandal broke, the captaincy, Ganguly took over captaincy. We went to South Africa in 2001, 2002.
And that series, in these ODIs, Ganguly took over as captaincy, and Rahul Dravid was used as a bowler, even in the death.
Oh, wow.
And Dravid bowled really well. I think Dravid was a really good death bowler. He was bowling really well. I don't know why Dravid's bowling faded away. Maybe because he had to keep wickets in ODIs. but he was a really good bowler.
Off spin, right?
Yeah.
He used to bowl off spin. I
Had he
can't
played,
remember him bowling in that series, but I remember him taking, I think, a wicket
no,
against Pakistan.
in that series, I think South Africa needed about 10 or something in one of the ODIs, and Dravid bowled the last over.
Did he defend the runs or?
No. India lost the match. Boucher, it was again Boucher. Boucher used to be a nightmare at one point.
Right, but we go there to play these test matches. We played 3 test matches: India and South Africa, 2001, 2002.
They were reduced to 2.
Correct, because we'll come to Mike Dennis, but my positive memory from this is the debut of Virender Sehwag and that partnership he had with Sachin.
And at that point, they were kept bouncing, and Sachin and Sehwag were uppercutting. And this is a shot I had read of. I had never seen Indian batters play against the fast bowling. I mean, in old cricket books, I had read of cricketers arching their backs and playing. Mushtaq Ali, I had read of, he used to arch his back and play over the slips, but watching it live was an experience. But in that series, in the first morning, VVS Lakshman made 32. And John Wright later called it the best 30 he has ever seen in his life. It was an outrageous innings. It was a very un-Lakshman-like innings. He just came out and blasted away at everything he got and scored 32 and got out.
Yeah, I don't remember that 32, but I do remember the Sehwag 100. I think we lost that test match. The second test match was drawn, but it came with a lot of controversy. It came with accusations of ball tampering, over-appealing, and India refused to play the third test match. So,
yes. I think anyone who has seen that match live will agree that I won't say the decision was harsh or anything, but the decision was not but the decision was biased, and there was no doubt about that, because the South Africans did not behave any better than the Indians. If the ban, whether the ban was justified, it's another story. But if the ban was there, it should have been there for both sides.
Yeah, and so we ended up in this weird scenario where you had an unofficial test match still being played, but without test status, and that was a compromise that the boards had brokered, and the players that were banned, I think Virender Sehwag was banned for over-appealing, didn't play that game.
Yeah. I really wish in 1970, South Africa were banned, and the rest of the world toured England for a 5-test match tour. So, but these matches were given test status at that point, and that status was taken away. So Alan Jones of Glamorgan got his test cap, which was later taken away. I found that very harsh. In 2020, Jones was given a test cap. A fresh test cap, finally. I wish Connor Williams gets a test cap.
Did he get 50 as well? Or did
I
he
think
get
40
odd?
But he batted better than some test cricketers on the tour. I found him more reassured against short-pitched bowling than some Indians of the era. I felt he was good, but he never played a test match. I wish he gets some kind of, he's honored in some way.
No, he didn't play, indeed. But then this is another situation where India have gone to South Africa. We still haven't won a series, which to date we haven't won a series. So we keep trying. We go back in 2006, 2007. Here, for the first time, we take a series lead. And that is down to Sreesanth, which...
What a spell.
What a spell. I mean,
I think... what commentators said that day, I completely agree that no Indian fast bowler since Kapil Dev has bowled with a seam as straight.
Yeah, what was it with Sreesanth in South Africa? Because he also got that ball to Kallis.
Yeah, I mean...
What happened to him when he used to go to South Africa? Was it just suiting his style of bowling, hit the deck?
Sreesanth debuted that year, and he did very well on debut at home against England. I think he took 4 wickets or something. He bowled really well on debut, and then he missed the next test. And he suddenly, after that one test match, he went to West Indies when he and Munaf Patel also debuted in that series against England. at home. And Sreesanth and Munaf Patel were the fast bowlers when India won the series in West Indies in 2006. A lot of us don't remember that series, largely because it clashed with the FIFA World Cup. So a lot of us, and at the time zone was the same, late night. So many of us watched the World Cup, but the loyal fan that I used to be, I stuck to cricket. And I really liked watching Sreesanth bowl. So I knew he was pretty good, but not this good. That day in Johannesburg, it was incredible. That would have taken down any side.
Yeah, he took 8 wickets that test match, which was just absolutely brilliant. And
in that, 2 hours of cricket, he took 5 for 40, I think. And in that one spell, I mean, that has to go down as one of the greatest spells bowled by an Indian fast bowler ever.
Yes, I've got that on my list of positive memories, along with his ball to Kallis in Durban in 2010, which turned Kallis into an S shape. I think it's up there in the top 20 balls of all time with cricket.
He was an incredible talent, but too erratic. Again, on his day, he could run through any side, but those days seldom came.
Absolutely, absolutely. But again, we ended up losing that series as well after taking a lead, which was, I mean,
seriously, Paul Harris.
Yeah.
Paul Harris.
For people who haven't watched cricket in that era, Abhishek, tell us who Paul Harris is, and how did we lose to this guy in South Africa?
I don't know how you can lose. I mean, they lost to Paul Harris. That
left arm slow, left arm.
In India, lesser known finger spinners have triggered collapse. On South African soils, losing wickets to a left arm spinner. See, my lasting memory of Paul Harris, South Africa came over in 2010 and there was a test match at Eden Gardens. This was the one where India won with minutes to spare. Amla scored 100 in each inning.
Harbhajan took the last wicket, right?
Yes. So what happened was, after, I think Sehwag and Tendulkar both got hundreds, and then Lakshman and Dhoni also got hundreds. And at one point, Harris was bowling over the wicket, outside leg stump. The ball wasn't even turning. He was just bowling into the pads straight. I mean, he was bowling nothing balls. And the crowd was chanting in the Sachin tone, Sachin. In the same tone, they were chanting white ball, white ball. So that is my lasting memory of Paul Harris. So India lost wickets to Paul Harris and lost a series in South Africa. It took me some time to get over this fact.
Yep. South Africa won that 1-2-1. And then they came to India the next year, and that's when the Dale Steyn era began, I think, if I'm not wrong, when he started destroying us.
So India were bowled out for 76, I think, in one session. I think, if my memory is not very good, but I think South Africa batted before lunch on day one after bowling out India. So that was how quickly India were bowled out. And you know what? I remember this vividly. I was at a dentist's clinic. And they asked me to wait, and it was a somewhat long wait, and India got bowled over during that wait.
Oh, wow. So an hour. 76.
Yeah.
But anyway, that series, there was one drawn test match. There was one test match each to South Africa and India. India obviously came back in Kanpur to bundle South Africa out and score the winning runs. So again, a story of teams not losing at home effectively. And if you look at the overall record, it's 14 test matches to India and 15 to South Africa, or 15 to South Africa and 14 to India. So it's very close, but neither won. And I mean, India have not won in South Africa, but South Africa have won in India. So that record needs to be sorted out.
That hurts.
That record needs to be
really
sorted
hurts.
out. Absolutely. But then you go into India and South Africa in 2010 and 2011. So for me, the only thing I remember from this really is, of course, the ball to Kallis, but then the 1.5 hours at Cape Town between Sachin and Steyn.
What a contest. I think it should go down as the duel of the decade or something. I mean,
I'm getting goosebumps as I think of it because I was watching it at lunch
can
break.
you imagine we are not reliving that session and we are discussing and whole nation is discussing Ganguly versus Kohli. I mean, what have we come to? What have we become, really?
Yeah, this is it. I mean that was, and I'm sure this has been written somewhere, and this is not an original one for me, but it was like an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object, and that was just Dale Steyn pounding in to Sachin Tendulkar, sun shining bright, good wicket. There's a bit of movement. Sachin's batting on over 100. The ball is flying off the deck, but he's in control, and it was two grandmasters ending in a stalemate. That's the only way I can describe it.
No other word for it.
It's just, and I don't know whether non-cricketing fans will ever understand the joy Test cricket fans will take from that session.
It's very difficult to. I mean, the easiest way is to watch the video again, but even that doesn't. I mean, because of the build-up to that session, I mean, the highlights won't show the build-up. So, the ones among us who were fortunate enough to watch it live were. I mean, we just saw it live. That was
yeah,
it.
and I remember it so clearly because I started watching it during my lunch break at London.
See, like yeah,
and that is when I just sat there watching the rest of it.
Warne versus Tendulkar in '98, Murli versus Lara in 2001. I mean, this is a contest right up there with these.
Yeah, Warne versus Lakshman in 2001 as well, bowling around the wicket. It's it was a contest for the ages. Steyn finishing with 5 wickets, Sachin finishing with 146, not out. And if you haven't watched the video, please go and watch the video. You won't get the entire feel of it, but you'll get a little flavor of what Abhishek and I just orgasming about.
That series, if that was India could have won that series.
Correct. Yeah.
I mean,
another lost opportunity.
I mean, I don't know.
Was it last Test match, right? Was it?
Yeah. I mean, you just couldn't get past that bat.
Yeah. It was drawn again. I think it was drawn at Cape Town, right? So, yeah.
I don't remember the venue, but yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
And the first Test match, this is again a selectoral thing. They flew out Jaydev Unadkat, who was very young. I think still a teenager, maybe. And he was just given a Test cap on debut. And I mean, in the first Test cap is obviously on debut, but he was just given a Test cap in the first Test match. And after that, he was never recalled to the Test side. And I found that very unfair, especially in a decade when India kept trying for left arm. I mean, they tried several. There was a time when Zahir and RP Singh and Nehra and Irfan were all playing, but at one point they were all gone from the Test side, and then India never recalled him. And he has been doing a tremendous job for Saurashtra, both as bowler and captain. But the Test cap is unlikely to come now.
Yeah, and we had him on the podcast actually last year, just after he'd finished as the top Ranji wicket taker, and he said that he was more of a red ball bowler, but he was seen as a white ball bowler because of the IPL tag,
that's what the IPL
and did. All of that stuff. And then he was recently, I think, told that he's 32, so he's never going to get a cap, but he's actually 29 because they don't even know how old the bowler is that they're saying is too old to get a Test cap. And it makes you wonder about the value of what Ranji cricket is. I mean, he puts in the hard yards there and you don't get a call-up, which, I mean, we've got a fantastic set of fast bowlers, but surely those domestic performances should count towards something. Right? But it's disappointing.
I think Panchal is a case of a Ranji Trophy superstar doing something incredible.
Similar to Mayank. I mean, Mayank had to beat down the doors as well, right? Like Mayank Agarwal had to smash the door down to get into the Boxing Day Test side in 2018, 2019. So maybe it's easier for batsmen. I don't know. Maybe they give more. Maybe there's more value given to that. But maybe we've digressed. So let's get back to the last couple of series that India have been in South Africa. Right? There was the
again India could have won that Test match. had De Villiers and Du Plessis not had that
2013, 2014, chasing 458. That's one of my depressing memories. I'm like, how we failed
And
to
I
win.
still had hopes when Rahane ran out. De Villiers, Du Plessis, which one?
I think it was De Villiers that got run out. I can't remember, but I mean, they fell only 7 runs short in the end because they decided not to go for it. So we almost lost test match after setting 458 to win, which was yeah, disappointing. And then we end up losing the next test match at Kingsmead with a collapse in one session. Right? Again, Dale Steyn triggers it, and South Africa win by 10 wickets. And the result, again, India have gone back empty-handed. Then we go back again in 2018. This is actually a series very close to our hearts because this podcast actually started out in South Africa when Varun and I went to watch cricket at Cape Town, and then
a few months before that, India went to Sri Lanka when Shastri and Arun had just taken over, and they had shortlisted and updated and intimated Bumrah that you'll be playing Test cricket. So that decision had been made. And
a few months before the
yes.
2018 series. Interesting.
And they had talked with BCCI. I mean, Bumrah had played first class cricket until then for some time. He has a terrific record, but he was perceived as an IPL bowler, as a limited overs specialist.
Similar to Jaydev Unadkat in a way, right?
Yes. But and they took Bumrah to South Africa and gave him his test cap.
And what a series it was. What a
career it has been.
What a career it has been indeed. But we again lose the first 2 test matches despite having them 12 for 3 in the first hour. De Villiers, brilliant, snatches that advantage away, and then Pandya tries to fight back, and it was a good
that Pandya innings is slightly underrated.
93 or so, I think.
If you look at how the Indian batters did in that tour, that Pandya innings is very underrated.
Indeed, and Kohli, I think, is the only one that got 100 in the next test match.
See, the series aggregates of Pujara and Vijay and whoever else there was around that series aggregates. I'm talking about 110, 120. These were the totals from 3 test matches, and Pandya got a 90 in 1 innings, and Kohli got that big innings.
Yeah,
and that was it.
But they'd also prepared tracks to punish India for what we'd given them when South Africa had come over. If you remember, we'd given them spinning tracks. So they said, we're going to give you green tracks. And it was interesting. I think that India actually ended up...
That is something they should do. Every side should do.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Sporting wickets.
And then India won the Joburg Test match, playing only fast bowlers, which was the first time all 20 wickets had been taken by fast bowlers for India, on what they were saying may have been a dangerous pitch to play on by the end of it.
India lost in England as well, 1-4, but India, I think, bowled out England twice. India took 20 wickets in 3 of the test matches. And in South Africa, India took, I think, all 60 wickets. So the fast bowlers were not letting India down.
No, it was the batters that were.
And on this tour also, the fast bowlers are not going to let India down. This is a fast bowling attack beyond the dreams of an 1980s, 1990s, 2000s India fan.
Abhay Kurulwala, Doda Ganesh, etc. All good bowlers, of course, but not in the same class, right? So.
If you play a test match for India, you are a good cricketer. You're
a very good cricketer. But you can't compare a Bumrah to a Abhay Kurulwala, effectively.
We could not imagine a Bumrah. We could not imagine a Shami. Now we have them together, and Siraj, and Ishant, and Umesh. I mean, we're basically spoiled.
It's brilliant. And Abhishek, we've actually covered off every point on my list and more. So I'm really pleased by that. But now that we've come to the current side, before we wrap this show, I want to ask you, what do we need to do to win a test series in South Africa? man. We need to at least win one. We've lost in India to South Africa in 2000. It was probably the lowest point Indian cricket has ever been at, with the match fixing scandal just about to break, having lost those two, captaincy change, all of that. What do we need to do in this upcoming series, starting on the 26th of December, to win in South Africa? I think first we need to put behind all this drama, Ganguly, Kohli drama. But after that, what do we need to do?
They will put these cricketers are too professional for this. I mean, last year in Australia we saw. I mean, half the team went down with injuries of all sorts. They were not even a COVID attack. They went down with injuries of all sorts. The net bowlers played. And still India won a series in Australia, which you can see how England are faring. So India won with a second, or maybe not a third, but a 2.5th strength team in Australia. So if they could handle that pressure, they will handle it. This is not going to prevent them from winning. If anything is going to prevent them, it's the cricket.
So no off-field drama will interfere, according to you. But is Kohli under pressure as a batsman? Because obviously he's the 3, 4, 5 question has been around for a while now.
See, over the past year and a half, Kohli's life has been either live in a hotel room in a bubble, or to bat and be criticized by millions of fans for every false stroke.
Or have a net session and have the media there covering the net session.
Yes. So this is the life he has been leading. I don't think anything can pressure him, put extra pressure on.
Okay, so
And this is not true for Kohli alone. This is true for all Indian cricketers. They are capable of handling incredible pressure.
But has he exposed himself to being dropped by taking on the BCCI and the selectors? That is the question. Right? Can they drop Kohli? They sacked him as captain in one format. Can they drop him as a batsman?
No.
No chance.
They can't even drop Rahane.
But they're slowly trying to phase Rahane out. I don't think that courtesy will be given to Kohli after what's just gone down, to be honest. We'll see.
If that happens, I don't know. They will have to mention a reason. Of course, they will.
Well, the numbers, they'll take out the numbers. Right? The numbers aren't looking good for him.
That's okay. There are cricketers who have worse. So, essentially, the question is whether Kohli is among the best 5 batters in India. Not the best batter, but among the best 5 batters.
I think, isn't the question, is he among the best 5 batters in India now?
5 or 6, depending on your combination.
5 or 6 now, right? Yes. That is the question.
Yes. So, that is the question. So, when you drop someone, you are essentially telling them and the fans that this man we are dropping is not among the top 6 batters in the country. And that is what we shall be looking at. If Kohli gets 100 now and they still drop him, I think.
No, they can't drop him if he gets 100. I think if he doesn't get runs, that is what my worry is. What if he doesn't get runs on this tour?
But he has got runs, I mean, in the England tour was a low scoring tour. Kohli crossed 40 in 4 of the 8 innings. I don't think that's a very good record, but that's not a record that will make you drop after a low scoring series. He missed a test in New Zealand. In the second test, he got a very controversial LBW decision, and he got out to a ranked bad ball in the second innings. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm still unsure about the umpiring decision. And he can only blame himself for the second innings decision. You saw it all over on his face that he was disgusted with his own choice of shot.
Okay, very quickly, I'm going to ask you, what's your playing 11 for the first test? Rahul's going to open. Mayank opens with him?
Assuming everyone is fit?
Assuming everyone is fit.
Right now, we are more or less decided on Rahul and Mayank. Right. Okay. Mayank had an excellent series.
And then Pujara 3?
Pujara at 4. Kohli at 4.
Who's batting 5 in this team?
Who's batting at 5? I think India will go in with 4 fast bowlers and 6 batters. So we have the 5 and
batters.
6 and leave out Ashwin. I think that
We're
is,
gonna leave him out.
they will do that because South Africa will prepare carpet.
Okay. Okay.
They are
So
going to give India
you're playing Rahane and Iyer.
green carpet welcome.
Okay, so fine. You're playing 6 batsmen. Are you playing Rahane, Iyer, or are you playing Rahane and Vihari, or are you playing Vihari and Iyer?
This is a very difficult question. On form, I would play Vihari and Iyer.
So you're dropping
Rahane, yes.
a man who was Test captain 2 Test matches ago, but is no longer even vice captain. So probably a fair call.
Again, as I said earlier in the show, that this is a team so strong that you can't be complacent.
So do you not think that one of the fast bowlers would be Shardul Thakur to give them that option of playing?
See, I am very respectful towards Shardul Thakur. I think there is. I don't even. I usually use the prefix that he deserves.
Lord Thakur.
So one day he chooses to bat like Tendulkar. One day he chooses when nothing is happening. One day he chooses just to make one ball do something and break a partnership. He then goes on to smash the fastest 50 in the history of Oval. And I don't know, the Shardul Thakur thing, he doesn't look like taking a wicket but until he gets that wicket. But he does get that wicket.
And some cricketers just have that. I mean, Ian Botham took wickets off full tosses, long hops. It's you know what they say, it's better to be lucky than to be good.
Yeah, of course.
Right? So I'm actually quite looking forward to seeing Lord Thakur retain his spot because he was in the Oval Test match.
Shardul, I don't know if they may want to leave out Ishant, and if they may want to pick Ashwin, Shardul, and Pant, and between these three, they may think
make up
they can cover up. They make up for Jadeja. I think was a big loss.
Yeah, absolutely. And
not only because of his batting abilities, but also because they could. We saw that at the Oval, right? They promoted him up the order.
Yeah, he batted. I think he batted 5.
Yes,
above Rahane.
So they want to put him in the mix, and they did that with Pant in Australia, but they did that with Jadeja in England once. And they might have done it again just to mess up the line of the opposition fast bowlers.
Yeah, and to break up the right hand, because otherwise it would be Pant followed by Jadeja. Unfortunately, Sundar is injured as well, which would have been the natural sort of replacement.
So I won't be surprised if India's number 5 is Pant. India have thought on these lines in Australia and in England. They may do it again in South Africa. So plug a left-hander at number 5.
Fair enough. But we will see. Abhishek, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. We've obviously run over our allotted time as it's always the case when we get into cricket-related discussions. But thank you very much. Can you tell our listeners who don't already know you where they can find you, where they can find your book, and what else you're going to be up to in the next?
Where they can find me? They can find me on Twitter. OVSHAKE42.
So Ovshake42.
Yes.
Okay, and where can they find your book? It's on Amazon. I think there's a link in your Twitter bio as well, right?
Yes.
And we'll put one in the show notes as well. But as I said, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care, and love to have you back again soon. Hopefully, after India won a series in South Africa.
India men should win their first Test series in South Africa. India women did that long ago. It's time India men follow suit.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Abhishek. Take care, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.
There you have it, guys. A terrific chat with Abhishek Mukherjee. It was all about the Kohli Ganguly saga, India's previous tours of South Africa, and the upcoming Test series in South Africa that the Indian men are there to play. As always, guys, you can write into us on contact@onetiponehand.com. We're on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at onetiponehand. So yeah, drop us a line, say hi, and we'd love for you guys to follow the Test series with us. We have a Discord channel as well. Leave us a review on Apple, Spotify, wherever else you listen to the show, and tell your friends about the show. The more you guys tell people, the more they know about the show, and the more people we can bring the show to. We will be back after the first test match is complete, and we will be covering that. Until then, guys, take care and keep listening to the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast. Thanks.
IVM.